Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to see all of your faces today. So good morning. I wanted to speak a little bit on this Shabbat about one of the most memorable moments from this past week for me. After a week of some really memorable speeches, I want to talk about the brilliant and the brave words of a 13-year-old boy who spoke about his journey to overcome his stutter, Braden Harrington. Many of you saw his video, and if you didn't, I want to encourage you to watch it after Shabbat. It's about 2 minutes long, and it was one of the most beautiful and courageous speeches I've ever seen in my life. He talked about how he was encouraged by the candidate who himself struggled to overcome a stutter. And it occurred to me as he was talking that this would have been a really brave speech to give at any time, years ago, even, standing before the whole world, doing the very thing that you're most afraid of, revealing to the whole world the part of you that you're most ashamed of. And all the more so, what does it mean to do that today, given the vile public discourse, the way that social media has turned into this kind of cesspool of human cruelty, being that anytime any of us put ourselves out there in the world now, we know that we're likely to be mocked and denigrated, and people will try to humiliate us in any way. And yet here was this boy who stood up in the midst of that culture, in that political moment, in that kind of environment. And he said, I'm just a regular kid. And when he did that, millions of people who saw wept and blessed him and were blessed by him, and found in this boy's words and in his sweet presence the kind of strength that we need, each of us, to overcome our own greatest challenges. So I wanted to start on this Shabbat morning by thanking Braden, by thanking this boy for setting out before us the spiritual work that all of us have in the course, especially of this next month. Because just in the last 2 days, we have begun Rosh Chodesh, we entered the month of Elul. We've had Rosh Chodesh Elul, when our work is really to ask the most challenging questions, not only of other people, what did they do that caused us harm and what would it take to make it better, but also of ourselves. Where are my weaknesses? Where have I failed? Where can I do better? And in order to do that work, we have to be willing to confront and even to expose some of our own greatest vulnerabilities, to see ourselves and to let others see us, not as perfect and strong people who've got it all together, but as frail, as sometimes failing, as full of struggle and doubt, as plagued by fear and by uncertainty. Why do we do this? Because our tradition teaches us that each of us has a mission, that each of us has a certain purpose in this world, something that we were uniquely put in the world to do. And how do we detect that mission, that calling? The Slonim Rabbi writes in Nitivot Shalom, know that your mission is connected to your root of wormwood and gall. This is an idea that the Hasidic rabbis use a lot. Your root of wormwood and gall, it's this bitter root, this particular area in your life, in your personality, that causes the greatest difficulties for you, and sometimes even brings out the worst within you. Because they understand that sometimes from within our greatest struggles will be revealed our greatest strengths. The Slonimer says, consider this, your soul has descended for the purpose of rectifying a particular trait. That is your mission on earth. So we're called to make it our business, to expend every effort in trying to confront and engage and even rectify this struggle. And in many ways, this is exactly the opposite of what we do. We're trained in our culture to try to cover over every flaw, to paint layers of foundation over the lines that reveal our exhaustion and our sadness and our pain. There are entire industries that are dedicated to creative ways of shielding ourselves and the world from our truest selves. And yet in this week's Parsha, in Parshat Shoftim, chapter 18 of Deuteronomy, it says, Tamim tihyeh im Adonai Elohecha, you shall be wholehearted with the Lord your God. If you want to find your way, your mission, your spiritual path, you have to start by revealing the broken parts. And Rabbeinu Bachya in Chovot HaLevavot says that this is the great objective of the spiritual life, to find some kind of alignment between our inner and our outer selves. Galuyenu utzvunenu, the hidden and the revealed parts of ourselves. He says that when we engage in a way where the insides don't match the outsides, people ultimately find out. And then people can no longer believe in us. We have no more integrity. We can no longer be taken seriously. But when we find a way to align our heart, our tongue, our limbs, when we can make them all consistent in the testimony that we bring to the world, then that's what it means when the Torah calls us to be wholehearted. And I want to say that I get it. I understand why we hide. I understand why we fear revealing to the world on the outside the struggles that we hold within. And yet I also see how that fear, that hiding, often leads us to shame, which takes root in the darkest edges of our souls and grows to influence everything, absolutely everything. I think often about how Father Greg Boyle teaches that shame is at the heart of addiction. Shame is at the heart of abuse and violence. Shame is at the heart of so much of the bad behavior in our lives and in our society. And if the Nikudat Tova, the purest point of goodness in us, can shed a light that illuminates the rest of our bodies and our souls, leading us to be our very best selves, so too can the point of shame, of busha, so too can it cast a dark shadow that leads us only to pain and spiritual exile, to a kind of condition that distances us from our truest selves, so much so that we might not even remember at some point who we really are. And I know that in my own life, I have at times spent years struggling with shame. I suspect that we all have in one way or another. It's consuming. The dissonance between who we are and who we're seen to be and who we wish we could be, it can be excruciating and devastating. Habitu lenafshotechem, look into your souls, says Rambam in Hilchot Tshuva. Look into your souls. This is the course correct for this time of year. Cheshbon nefesh, a kind of fearless self-accounting, scrutiny and honesty that requires breaking down the charade, exposing the weaknesses, peeling away the layers of facade and falsehood. I've been thinking this week about a man that I sat with several years ago, a wealthy guy. He was philanthropic and very generous to his friends. He was known to live a good life. He was a guy who was always entertaining and traveling, and he was the life of the party. And he lost everything. He lost everything in a business deal that went awry. He called it the calamity. He was betrayed by somebody he trusted, and he lost it all. And very quickly, his whole life was turned upside down. His life savings disappeared in an instant. He was humiliated because he thought that he should have known better. And when he came in, he was slouching and he wouldn't make eye contact with me. He told me that months had passed since the calamity and he hadn't told a soul what happened. And this was in some ways the worst part of it all. Nobody knew. It took all of his physical and his spiritual strength to keep up the charade that everything was okay when everything was completely not okay. Every single social interaction he had was like a knife in his tender heart. And he came to see me just before giving up his home, which he could no longer afford to keep. Because he realized that once that happened, once he lost his house, he would no longer be able to fake it, that everybody around him would know. And his whole being was consumed with shame. He was trying to imagine who he would be without this wide circle of friends around him, colleagues, friends, where would they go once they realized his misfortune? And he said to me, how will they see me? So I asked him, how do you see yourself? And he said, I don't. I've never looked. He spent his whole life seeing himself only through other people's eyes, through their respect, through their adoration, through their envy, through their positioning around him. And now he was just going to be a person to them and to himself. And so we spent some time together and I tried my best to hold up a mirror to his soul, to help him see himself for the first time in his life. And over the course of our time together, he learned a couple of things. He learned that most of his friends were going to disappear when they found out that he was broke. It was just true that they would. And he also realized that he didn't like most of them that much anyway. He also realized that he found all that entertaining really burdensome, truth be told. And he realized that he was loved, not by many people, but by a few people. That there were a few good people in his life who he trusted and who he realized were going to stand by him when the truth became known. So we talked about what a relief it would be to give up all the pretension, just to be who he really was, for his insides to match his outsides, for him to finally be what the Torah calls us to be, wholehearted. And he looked me in the eye finally, just before he left my office. Someone knew the truth about him and didn't run away. It was a start of the next chapter of his life. I want to say that that sweet boy who spoke to America on Thursday night gave us all a gift. As we enter Rosh Chodesh Elul, we all want the world to feel better, he said. We need the world to feel better. And we do. And our tradition dares us. The way to make the world feel better is to bring about a kind of change and transformation that has to start within each of us. We have to do the inner work. Name the struggle. Name the root of wormwood and gall and lift it up into the light, to take a little bit from the courage of this child and to stop hiding and pretending. This is an act of faith. If this time has taught us nothing else, I hope it's shown us how very fragile and precious life is. Let us not waste our time on the pretensions and the facades and the falsehoods. Let us not waste our energy on hiding from the world what our deepest truth is. Instead, let us believe that that truth is the gift that the world needs to hear. The Slonimer says, much is required of us. Though we do not fully understand it, we intuit that we are living in a very great time of history. And we need to recognize the importance of our mission, our obligation, our task in this generation, and then to utilize what has been given to each of us so that we not despise the unique gift that God has planted inside of us. So Chodesh Tov, welcome to this month of deep introspection and reflection. Let us get to work. There is so much that needs to be done to make the world feel better. Shalom.